Jamie is like, this is like a Jamie episode. It's a Beth and Jamie episode, but Jamie, like, he has this big legal win where he gets Casey out of trouble because Casey was arrested and the reservation thinks he killed these men. Jamie comes lawyering in and he just crushes all their arguments and gets Casey out of there in like lickety-split time. And then he is just peacocking back to that helicopter. He is strutting that whole episode, even with Beth in the car. He's got all the snappy responses. Like, he is feeling good about himself. Whoa, Jamie.
Let's dive into trivia. I actually can't remember what the last trivia question was. So remind me as well, and I'd love to know who won. Oh, actually, I do remember the trivia. Yeah, never mind. I remember I don't know, and unfortunately, I still don't know. So,
okay, staff at tasteofcountry.com is the place to send all answers, correct or incorrect, or you can leave them in the comment section of our weekly videos on YouTube. First correct answer gets celebrated like we do, and last week's trivia question had to do with an actor named Takala Black Elk, who plays Sam Stands Alone on Yellowstone. He was the guy with the voice that didn't seem to match the body from episodes 1 or 2, Monica's brother's friend, a tall, thin Native American. We've seen this actor before and talked about him before on this very podcast. Where and why?
What was the answer?
Joey on YouTube correctly knew it was Isabel May on 1883. She was trying to grab a settler's gun and turn it on the wagon trains attacking Native American warriors. He is the warrior that wounds her with the arrow that ultimately kills Elsa Dutton in episode 9, Racing the Clouds. Afterward, he goes up to Tim McGraw's James Dutton, has the conversation about how brave the daughter is, but that was Takala Black Elk, the same actor. I can't 100% remember if he's the one who kills Elsa Dutton, but I know he has that conversation with James Dutton. Very important character late in the series of 1883.
Wow. I remember the scene. I still don't remember his part specifically, but yeah, wait, he played a huge role.
Yeah, he did. And so Joey is our big winner this week, and I have a confession to make afterwards. But first, let's not take any shine off of Joey, who was there. He was first, who was on it. Joey, you are the man. I appreciate your participation, and I just appreciate you. I know you are bound to do great and generous things for your community. People are looking to you, Joey, and are going to follow your lead as you get them out of these troubled times. Joey, 3 cheers for Joey. Hip, hip.
Hooray!
Hip, hip.
Hooray!
Hip, hip.
Hooray! I'm so you included me on this. That was such a good duo effort.
Quick shout out to Hayden, who we lauded last week for a correct answer and emailed me back and said, "Hey, thanks for the love, but I'm actually a man, not a woman." My bad on that one. That's me right here. Me.
It is on you, Billy. Hayden, it's okay. I actually, historically, Addison is more of a male name. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of times before people meet me, they're like, "Oh, wait, you're a girl." Yeah. And I'm like, "Yes." So I get it. It happens. Alrighty. On that note, what is this week's trivia question?
This week's trivia question has to do with episode 5. And at the very beginning of the episode, there are some cowboys on the ranch doing some real cowboy kind of stuff. They're just cowboying up and down all over the place. But there's a specific move that a horse pulls off. You might recognize it if you're part of like the rodeo community. It's where the horse sort of runs and then stops really quickly and skids and all the sand goes flying into the air. And they seem to be acknowledging the horses that can do it better. What is that move called and what is the event called? Staff at tasteofcountry.com. I'll take kind of a generic description because there's a few possible answers, but the first person to get that right, congratulations to you.
Dang, my brothers are going to be so disappointed that I don't know the answer to that.
You know, we've talked about this before on past episodes as well, because you'll see this throughout the series. This is one of the cool things about Yellowstone is they do give you these glimpses of real cowboy life. And we start to see it here with episode 5 when Travis, who is played by Taylor Sheridan, brings these horses in. Oftentimes, he'll bring horses in that are legit, like, it's the horse he says it is. Like, you can Google the horse's name and go, "Oh, wow, that really is a horse that gets like a $100,000 breeding fee." or something like that.
Right.
Or that horse really has, like, he has these horses who are really world champions or champions in their sport, and he brings those in. So this is all really legitimate, real cowboying stuff that happens, and a lot of the actors and certainly a lot of the actors and the stuntmen are trained in the art of rodeo.
I think it is so cool.
Yeah, it's a cool part of it.
Let's break down episode 4, and then we'll kind of come back and kind of dissect like our thoughts. So what happened in episode 4?
Well, episode 4 starts off with Thomas Rainwater and his team finding the bodies that Casey had buried in the previous episode. He had come across that van, and they buried the bodies after Casey had killed them. Casey didn't really commit a crime, but he certainly did do some cover-up. I mean, he shot those men in self-defense, clearly. So Casey has to deal with that. Jamie ends up lending a big assist and really sort of stars there. But that doesn't happen until episode 5. Episode 4, we just find the bodies. At the end of the episode, Casey is arrested for that crime. But the drama plays out in episode 5 there. We start to meet Lloyd and some of the others in the bunkhouse. Lloyd especially stands up in a very big way that I know we're going to spend some time on. Another one of the bunkhouse wranglers is a man named Fred, who his time on Yellowstone was pretty short-lived. And then we also meet a man named Emmett, who reveals John's cancer diagnosis, and we get to talk a little bit about that. John had been battling cancer, which is a new little wrinkle. And then finally, there's a lot about Beth's plan to take down Dan's Jenkins. Her plan is pretty unconventional. She wants to sleep with everyone in his family, basically. Kind of seems like his whole family might be into it, so that might be problematic. But we go from there. That's episode 4 in a nutshell.
Yeah. And there you go. Cherry on top. Bada bing, bada boom. Episode 4, which was titled The Long Black Train. Mm-hmm. Because this is the episode that we find out what the train station is.
This is the train station episode. It all goes back to this. And this is like the greatest part of Yellowstone folklore is this train station. And it's the place where the men of the Yellowstone take the people that they're going to kill or the bodies that they've killed, and they sort of dump them off the edge. At this point in the show, we don't know why it's called that. So I'm going to spoil that reveal for you a little bit here. It's not a huge plot spoiler, but certainly by now, if you Google it, you're going to come across the same information. The idea is that there's this little sliver of land that is kind of between jurisdictions. Like no one lives there, so it'd be impossible to have a jury of your peers. Therefore, you could theoretically get away with any crime you want. In real life, a sliver of land like this exists in Idaho called the Zone of Death, and people think that you could get away with murder there. That's very real. The murder part, not so much. No one's ever tested it, and most people think that if you actually did kill someone in the Zone of Death, they'd find some way to get you.
It's not completely lawless.
Well, it isn't. I mean, just no one's tested it. There was like one small crime that happened like 20, 30 years ago, and I think they ended up settling, so it was never put to the ringer. But the Zone of Death seems to be what Taylor Sheridan has based his train station on.
And Emmett's the ranch hand that we don't see. He doesn't have his, what am I trying to say here? He gets cut short, correct?
Not in this episode.
Who's
Fred?
Oh, sorry, Fred. Okay, yeah. Thank you. I just was mixing. I was mixing them up in my head. But this is one that Fred. That's why he had such a short stint. He gets taken to the train station. He's the first one that we see.
The first time you saw Fred, didn't you just hate him? He just has that real. He just has a real hateable face.
He has a very punchable face. I'm not gonna lie. He just looks like he's up to no good. Like you were never someone nice. Like. You know, even Jamie, sometimes it's like, oh, dadgum. Like, but he does. He's not a Fred. Like, there's lines like we can, categorize them, and I wouldn't put them in the same category.
And then he's picking on Jimmy, poor Jimmy, who just got dragged there and is still coming off. He's in like some sort of detox, and he trips him up, and he goes too far and really tunes him up pretty good until Rip comes in out of nowhere and just throws Fred around. And Fred is a big man on this show. Like he's probably 6'4", 200. Rip throws him around like a rag doll and then tells John about it and says, hey, John, I think we need to take Fred to the train station. And even then, we don't know what the train station is. So it's like, oh, okay, cool. Fred's got to go on a train.
And I just love what's so interesting to me is even John, like the casual conversation of, okay, got to take him to the train station. Like my initial thought is not, all right, I'm done with them. Let me go murder them. Like there's some psychological misconnections there.
It was with the same sort of intensity as they might say it's time to take some of their cows to slaughter. Like there was no emotional connection to Fred. And the other thing I loved about this is that Lloyd does it. Lloyd gets the dig. This is a great way to introduce Lloyd and sort of tell us all that this sort of den of criminals and murderers expands well beyond just John Dutton and Rip. Like everybody who's part of Yellowstone in some sort of way is in on this crime. And Lloyd says, "The long black train." When the guy just stands there and then he slowly falls back. It's just such a classic death scene.
It was kind of nice seeing Lloyd in that position because when I came to start watching Yellowstone, what I surround Lloyd with is Laramie, Walker, the love triangle. So I've only known him in this poor little, sad puppy dog, feeling bad, but not even really seeing like what he's good at when it comes to, his job, because it's always trying to get the girl disappointed that he doesn't have the girl. We're going to take out Walker because we're upset. La, 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 la. Yeah. So it was nice to see him like, oh, like this is the role that you play on the ranch. Cool.
He gets a little neutered in later seasons, no doubt about it. But like, I think it's set up that we're to understand that Lloyd was like the Rip before Rip. Like,
yes,
he had Rip's job as sort of the number one in charge of the bunkhouse, and he made the decisions. And Rip very much looks up to Lloyd, and we'll see that explained in a few episodes as well. But Lloyd's a badass. There's no doubt about it. Like, he's a super cool character, and every time he's on screen, he just sort of steals the scene, especially in seasons 1 and 2.
This episode the beginning was kind of hard for me to watch. Monica's brother's sister-in-law ends up killing herself. And it's just a really, I wrestle with this with Yellowstone in general. I doesn't shy away from being graphic. And at the same time, I'm like, ooh, sometimes it can just hit me really heavy. That was a scene that I think was done really well in the sense of, after she committed suicide. I don't know the sister-in-law's name. I don't know if we ever got that. If we did, but you see Monica having to cut out the piece of carpet where the blood was, and you just see blood all over the walls and stuff like that. And like, I felt like I was there, and just thinking of, oh my gosh, like like having Monica have to clean all of that up. I couldn't imagine. And then seeing Casey, walk outside and it's their children, not Casey and Monica, but brother-in-law is Robert, right?
Robert was the brother.
Yeah. Seeing them out there. And it made me think of, and especially like episodes going forward, is, Luke Grimes has said like it was so hard for him not to take his work home with him. Now, him and his wife in real life, I don't think have any kids.
They don't.
But it's one of those that I kind of understood. Once again, I'd never seen season 1 of like, holy smokes, like that. Like if you are someone who struggles with not blending work and real life, I understand, because it's like, man, these are heavy scenes.
One of the interesting kind of things that Taylor Sheridan does in the treatment of his Native American characters on shows is he doesn't like respond to their lack of representation by glorifying like the life that they are living. Like that felt like a really authentic scene to me on 2 different levels. First of all, like if you have a family member commit suicide, like there's not some state agency that comes in and does the cleanup. It's up to you. You either got to clean it up, or you can hire someone and pay a few $1,000s to have that cleaned up if you want to continue to live in that house. Like that's not something that like the police department does. But also just we got a real good look, and we've gotten a really good look at the level of poverty and drug abuse on the reservations. And that's mixed and almost contrasted with the wealth of the casinos and this sort of world of have and have nots that's happening there. It's he has a lot of advisors, so I have a lot of trust that what we're seeing is pretty authentic, because he's kind of created this team of advisors to sort of create those scenes. It is disturbing, but it's sort of, I mean, we saw a lot of this in 1923 too. Really, it's real, and it's what happened, and that's what felt good about that. I don't know. That's why I think people keep coming back to this show, is because of the authenticity.
Yeah. Is there anything in the beginning, something a little bit more lighthearted that I just kind of got a chuckle at is, once again, we find Miss Beth Dutton in a bar. I'm like, that is her. She could probably start paying rent at this bar. That she is like, every scene that we see her in, Beth is at the bar.
Yeah. She's doing damage at the deer field. What is your take on Dan Jenkins? Like, how do you feel about him at this point? I'm going to ask you this now, and I'm not going to respond. And I want to ask you. I'm going to ask you a few times throughout this season, because he's a really interesting character, and I think the perception of him is kind of a little bit warped.
He's squirrely to me. Like, I don't really like. He's not someone who I'm like, I do not trust you. Yeah, you just squirrely, I think is the best word, and kind of like he's gonna get what he wants. I don't care how people feel, because you even see, with the scene with his wife and all the above, and it's kind of like it's his world, what he wants, and if you don't fit in that, moving on.
Certainly an aggressive businessman.
Yeah, like I don't think more like I wouldn't say that he checks his moral compass.
Yeah. Beth takes him to that bar. Come on. That's fantastic.
And Beth says, all right.
Yeah. She, it's in the bar here. And I think this episode, another important thing that's happened is the music of Yellowstone starts to become really important with this scene. And one of the bands, Whiskey Myers, is that bar band. They kind of made a second career out of, like, after this episode. Like, they blew up after these two songs. There was a song Frogman, and then we get to watch them sing a song called Stone. When Rip and Beth are dancing, like that, their careers really took off after that. And if you look in the archives of this podcast, you'll see we did an interview with the Whiskey Myers guys, and they talk about that. But it's pretty fascinating, and the music only gets better and more interesting from here.
I think what's interesting is, so I had heard of Whiskey Myers, had no clue they were associated with Yellowstone, and when I saw that, and it literally, like, on the back of the band, like the little like the backstage, the backdrop said Whiskey Myers, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is probably why they blew up. Like, I didn't know that they had come from Yellowstone, so I was like, oh my gosh, this makes so much sense.
They had some level of fame before because the lead singer was in another pretty popular Texas band, but this took their career from like maybe like a 5 to a 7 or an 8 in terms of that scene.
Can we talk about the fact that Tate is with John, and Tate, they're out, they're making a fire, so they're collecting wood, yada yada yada, and Tate essentially falls into the river. John starts hustling to catch up with the current and catch Tate, and literally what was going through my mind, obviously I knew that Tate wasn't going to die because we quite literally see him in every single season, but I was like, oh my gosh, John Dutton's luck. Like, that's talk about never being forgiven. Like, the one time John is like, finally Casey's loosening the reins. Monica's like, they're giving him more trust. And I'm like, this would happen to John Dutton. This totally would.
Yeah, it was his fault, but it was just sort of an unlucky set of circumstances, and kids being kids as well. Like, Casey didn't seem to be nearly as mad at John as John thought he was going to be.
I guess that's true.
Like, there was no screaming. Even Monica, she didn't, have that panicky sort of mother tantrum.
That is true. Well, this episode, we also learned that I knew that John had cancer once before, but I didn't know where it originated. I didn't know that his kids never knew in the beginning. And at least in this episode, it seems like, okay, we are dealing with it, but I just didn't know the extent. But I will say, when Tate points out when they were at the river and John is leaned back, and his guts kind of showing a little bit, and you can see the stitch line. I don't know if you thought, and so Tate goes, what's wrong there, and he makes up this fictional story, but what got me during the scene was like, who the heck, John, sewed you up?
Yeah.
It looks like you're like a taxidermy animal. Like it looked like, literally someone blindly went, all right, let me, poor intern decided to stitch John up. It was the jankiest. I was like, that cannot be real. What?
It didn't look like a pro job. I did notice that as well. There was like 2 stitches. You're good to go.
Well, and they were really wide. Literally, I mean, I've had my
really
fair
wide.
share of stitches, and they're tight because you've got to make sure nothing spills out. And I'm like, there is no way in real life that thing is staying together and your insides are staying in.
So Emmett is one of the characters that he has that heart-to-heart about John, about his cancer and his health overall. And Emmett ends up kind of being a pivotal character throughout this. We don't see a lot of Emmett, but he's like one of these town old-timers that comes in, and every time he does, you listen to him. And if you remember, later in the series, Emmett kind of meets his end and comes to, well, Emmett dies eventually here. I'm not going to spoil too much because the way he dies is pretty interesting, but keep an eye on him. I don't know if you put together that was the same guy, though, from season 5, I believe.
No, I did not.
Do you remember the scene, though,
but
now, how he dies?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. He's like one of those old timers. He's also the guy who later on tries to get Casey to run for governor.
I don't completely remember that.
Yeah, that was one of those plot lines that just sort of unravels. The don't worry about it.
That's probably why I didn't worry about
it. John's cancer. Real quick on John's cancer, like a lot of people, there's some debate about whether or not it comes back or whether he has a different health situation a little bit later on in this season. Just watch closely because I think a lot of people have it wrong, like what actually happens to John.
Is there anything before we get into we started this last segment or last episode where Billy kind of debunks literally what he just said, the don't worry about it. And we kind of touched on those as we went, but if you want to just more so like categorize that, but before we get there, is there anything that you want to touch on that we haven't, that you kind of noted?
I think we covered the majority of episode 4 here. And I would almost even put Tate in the River in the don't worry about it category. Although it was a nice scene to see John, his sort of more, the heartwarming side of him, that softer side of him that contrasts with this guy who's taking people to the train station regularly. But nothing really ends up coming of it, I don't think.
Heartwarming. Billy, did you expect him to be like, oh, well, he's gone. He fell into the river. We're just going to move on. Okay.
Kind of, because he didn't really grieve all that much after Lee died. Like, he has one good cry. And, like, he's kind of been business as usual since Lee died. And that was just a couple of days ago. Like, he's not. So, yeah, I wouldn't have been surprised if he was just like, oh, shucks. What's for dinner,
there goes
Gator?
Another one. I'm waiting for you. Do you want to talk about don't worry about it?
I'm looking to see what other don't worry about it we might have. I think we covered them all in terms of the don't worry about it category. I want to correct a don't worry about it. I had said that Casey trading gun slides with the reservation sheriff was a don't worry about it. And I was dead wrong on that. In episode 5, that comes back to haunt him. And that ends up being a really big, important plot point. Now after episode 5, we don't have to worry about it too much, but that did come back.
I will say, so last podcast, I don't think you said don't worry about it. I think you said don't worry about it for too long.
All right.
Maybe you didn't. Anyways, I'm just giving you a little bit more credit of like, to your point that you just made of, yes, you do need to worry about it, but don't hold too tightly to it.
Yeah. No, I would say that's true. What it ends up doing is sort of setting up Jamie to have a great, are we ready to transition to episode 5?
Let's talk about episode 5, Coming Home.
Jamie is like, this is like a Jamie episode. It's a Beth and Jamie episode, but Jamie, like, he has this big legal win where he gets Casey out of trouble because Casey was arrested and the reservation thinks he killed these men. Jamie comes lawyering in and he just crushes all their arguments and gets Casey out of there in like lickety-split time. And then he is just peacocking back to that helicopter. He is strutting that whole episode, even with Beth in the car. He's got all the snappy responses. Like, he is feeling good about himself. Whoa, Jamie. Get yourself.
Well, even, there's in that scene, Casey's kind of smiling because he realizes he's like, oh, my brother's on a roll and I am getting out of here.
Yeah, he does. And then Jamie takes a shot at him afterwards. Like, God, I don't forget what he says. Like, don't something mess this up after saving your ass again, Casey, as he's trying to get a ride home in the helicopter.
Right. Explain why.
Go ahead.
Explain why when you said, we don't have to worry about the Casey gun issue after this episode. Because during that sequence is when we learn, oh, this might be an issue, but then it becomes not an issue.
Because I think the Chief Rainwater and his chief of police and the Duttons all sort of agree that they're just going to let this one, there's really no victims outside of the two would-be rapists. Everybody, if this was to go to jury, it would probably be death by self-defense, which would be acquittable. But in the meantime, everybody would just kind of get a bad rap. The sheriff for trading the gun slides, Casey for shooting some people. Like, it would cause everybody a big, big headache. So they all just kind of collectively agree to forget about it. And I'm going to say this a little bit hesitantly, but I think after this, that plot line is done with. I think.
Well, once again, a plot line that is not done with is the fact that scene just hones in even more how much Casey, we are all working to protect Casey.
Well, it does. Why is Casey looked at as such like a child in need of protection? Like, he's the youngest and he's the baby, but he's a very competent adult. He was a Navy SEAL, for Pete's sake.
That's the question I'm pondering. Other than it, I think the reason why is we're still hooked on he was mom's favorite, so we need to honor that. To me, I'm like, well, mom's not here anymore. Not to discredit like her wishes, but also it's like this is many, many, many years down the road. Like, we're now adults. Like, we weren't the same people 20 years ago. I don't know how old Casey's supposed to be, but you know what I mean? It's like we're not the same people. We evolve and change. I think, I don't know. I think it's a little, I think there's a balance to it and it's not there.
His part of the episode is he's still very much trying to find peace with where he belongs on the Dutton Ranch, and if he belongs on the Dutton Ranch. He seems to be slowly creeping back in some ways that are both of his own doing and against his will. Like, John invites him back and then just says stay for the night, and then before long John Dutton is offering or setting up a professorship job for Monica Dutton. Like, John is trying to find all the ways to bring them back home because he says he doesn't want to lose another kid. And Casey's really struggling with that. This is Casey's torture, I think, throughout the series. Like, to what extent he wants to be a Dutton versus sort of his own man versus someone who is loyal to the reservation.
Mm-hmm. This episode is where we meet Mr. Walker himself.
Okay, so you've seen now Walker for an episode.
Yeah.
And you have an opinion of Walker based on watching seasons 4 and 5. I'm curious to know, how will your opinion of him change now that you're watching from the beginning and seeing Walker's origin story?
I still feel the same.
You're not a big fan of him.
I think the aspect that I don't see of him yet, but because he hasn't been put in that position, is he's a player. Like, he's a instigator and he's a player. And yes, we haven't seen that. And I guess specifically what I'm thinking of is the Beth and Walker scene where he's trying to get her back on a horse. You can clearly tell like Beth hasn't done that in a hot second. I think because I've actually already seen that scene, I was a little bit more numb to it because I've seen that scene before. It didn't make me dislike him more. I just kind of was apathetic of like, okay, hey, Walker. But what I did find interesting is I didn't realize. So when Rip picks him up from prison, John pretty much says, go to the prison, find someone to replace Fred. So there goes Walker. There goes Rip to get someone who's coming out of the prison who happens to be Walker himself. I didn't realize Walker's in the car telling Rip, how he actually has ranching experience, yada, yada, yada. And I didn't realize that Walker was originally from Texas. He name drops, yeah, I've worked at the 4-6's ranch. My mind's blown of like, oh my gosh, it makes so much sense. Flash forward to season 5, where at the end we're seeing him along with some other people in the bunkhouse with Rip. They're loading up cattle and they're gonna go essentially to Texas, to the 4-6's ranch.
To the 4-6's.
Yeah, and so I'm like, oh, he's going back. No wonder he's going with them. I mean, I don't know if this was all intentional, but I'm like, oh, he's going back with them to somewhere he already knows and has worked.
Yeah, he's got a lot of experience. And the Yellowstone clearly has a lot of a reputation that even penetrates the prison walls, where Walker had already heard about the brand and what that means in that rumor. The brand, just a quick summary there. They use the brand for criminals, and we see that Jimmy gets it because he was in jail. Walker now gets his brand. We don't yet know why Lloyd gets his brand, and to be honest, I don't even remember if we ever have found out. But we'll find out a little bit more about Rip and how he got the brand, I think, later this season, because that's a pretty interesting part of the show.
And I'm not going to spoil it. I was looking at my notes to make sure it. Oh, yeah, no, to make sure I wasn't going to accidentally pre-spoil it. The next episode, my mind is blown when it comes to the brand and a specific son of the Dutton family and why he was branded.
Oh, I don't recall why. Okay,
Well,
I'm excited to watch. I haven't. You're ahead of me.
See.
You're ahead of me. We've been watching on Peacock to sort of stay ahead, and you are ahead of me on these.
And I'm running past Billy. Anyways, all that to be said, that is something that, I mean, talk about don't worry about it. Yeah, let's continue to worry about the brand and the why behind why people are branded.
So the end of this episode, the last 10 minutes or so, I think are probably the big takeaway from episode 5. And this is the Jamie and Beth scene. Beth really breaks down in the car and reveals how Jamie didn't lose the mom like Beth did because she watched her die, and she had those evil last words said to her that were said to her without any love in her voice, and that's what she has to hold on to, and that clearly still haunts Beth to the point that she went home and screamed for 10 minutes and no one checked in on her, which was kind of strange. But the whole scene was really emotional, and Jamie, I thought, has that great line, and I love this line. And to me, this just proves everything that people think about Jamie wrong, where he says, if you need to hate me so that you don't hate yourself, I'll be that for you. Like, everybody always accuses Jamie of doing everything for himself, being totally selfish. And I don't see that yet. I haven't seen that play out to be true yet.